Good evening and welcome to the Path of Awakening course. The course we're currently working our way through is called Death and the Bardos, and we're on class 4. So let's start by bowing in. Good evening, everyone. So let's see. Who do we have? Michael, maybe you could make some people co-hosts, because you're the host, so that we have more than one. Valerie and others. Okay, so we're working our way through Francesca Fremantle's book at the moment, Luminous Emptiness, which is about the death teachings. And we're on chapter 3, Hearing, the Power of Transmission. There were 2 chapters assigned for tonight. One is shorter, that's this one, and one is quite longer. And we decided that we're going to split them up. Tonight we're going to just do this shorter chapter, and next week Michael is going to present the longer chapter. So we are doing chapter 3, Hearing the Power of Transmission. These teachings are based a lot on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, so-called. The actual title of this work is the Bardo Todo, which means liberation through hearing in the Bardo. And that's the real title of it. But what happened was that when it was first translated by Evans Wentz, there was already a translation of the Egyptian book dealing with death. And it was called the Book of the Dead, and it was very popular. And so Evans Wentz and his compatriot, I forget the Tibetan fellow, decided to call this the Tibetan Book of the Dead because they thought it would give it more currency and popularity. The actual title, though, is Achieving Liberation in the Bardo. And of course, the Bardo literally means interval. From to is the etymology of that word, Bardo. And there are 6 main Bardos. Actually, almost anything is a Bardo. So there's the Bardo of this class, which has its beginning when I rang the bell, I suppose, and will have its ending when we do the closing chants. There can be a Bardo of anything, but there are 6 main Bardos in the Tibetan teachings. And they are, one is the Bardo of this life, which begins when you are conceived and take, not birth, but are conceived and become a embryo in your mother's womb. And it ends, the Bardo of this life, when you die. Or when actually it ends at the moments when you are beginning to die. And that encompasses 2 other subsidiary main Bardos. One is the Bardo of dream, and that begins with a dream, and it ends when the dream ends. And there are whole practices based around the Bardo of dream, becoming conscious of the fact that you are dreaming while you're dreaming. And there are reasons for this that we're not going to be going into tonight. The second Bardo within the Bardo of this life is the Bardo of meditation. And that begins when you sit down to meditate and ends when you ring the gong and end your meditation, or just when you tell yourself that you're starting and ending meditation. Then there are the death Bardos, and there are 3 of these. The first is called the painful Bardo of dying. And it begins the moment that you contract the condition that is going to end your life. and it contains different stages. There are the four main stages of the falling away of the physical world. And the first one is the falling away of the physical world, the material world. Second has to do with the falling away of the fluid world. The third with fire, the heat of the world. The fourth with wind, which is kind of the energy of life. And the fifth with space. And when these all dissolve, you are dying. Now, Western science has it that when the body shuts down, you're dead. But in the Tibetan scheme, this is not the case. You still are living. Your mind is still alive. And so there are stages that are described to the shutting down of the mind. And at the point where the mind completely shuts down, it takes place in 3 stages, because there are 3 different kinds of mental events: passionate, aggressive, and just stupid, ignorant, non-moving. These 3 types. And the first that shuts down is are the passionate mental events. The second are the aggressive, and the third are the neutral or non-moving mental events. And when they shut down altogether, all 3 kinds, then you are said to have died. And at that moment, there is a possibility, if you have trained extensively during your lifetime, of achieving complete enlightenment in a moment by recognizing the state beyond birth and death, beyond life and death. And this, but you have to have trained extensively in meditation to do this. Most people have not. And if you have not, then you pass on to the next of the death bardos, the second, which is called the bardo of Dharmata. In Sanskrit, it's Dharmata. In Tibetan, it's Chini. In English, you might call it the bardo of reality. And in this bardo, you see the energies of this life: aggressive and angry, peaceful and wise, and neutral in between. And you also see the realms. You can actually see all of this. And you can achieve enlightenment in the bardo of Dharmata, again, if you have trained adequately before entering the bardo of Dharmata. Now, most people have not. The person you meet on the street, who sells you your newspaper or whatever it might be, they have not trained it adequately. And so for them, the bardo of Dharmata just goes by in a finger snap. And they don't really realize that they've seen anything. And they move into the third of the death bardos. Either that way, or you can see the bardo of Dharmata, but if you haven't trained enough again in meditation, in wisdom, you will pass on into the third of the death bardos, which is called variously the bardo of becoming, the bardo of existence. This is the famous 49 days so-called bardo, in which you are moving towards rebirth. And they say of this bardo that when you're in it, you have the body of a child. You imagine yourself as a child. It's like a dream state. It changes very rapidly. It can be just like a dream, violent 1 minute, peaceful the next. It can just change around quickly. And you are going through it as a child. They say the first half of it, so-called 49 days. Now, that's figurative speech because, of course, this is a dream state, as it were, or a purely mental state. So there are no literal days. There is no day and night rising of the sun and setting of the sun and that kind of thing. It's figurative. And you go through it. Initially, you are going through in the body of a 7-year-old child, and you're seeing your life unfold. It changes very rapidly as a dream does. 1 minute you can be standing on a street corner in New York, and the next minute you're with your mother in Poughkeepsie and whatever, just like a dream. And eventually, in this bardo of becoming, they say it lasts 49 days. That's figuratively speaking. You know, there are no days and nights. It's all like a dream. So it's a figurative turn of phrase. But at some point in this so-called dream, you can get enlightened again, just as you can at any time. You can get enlightened right now by waking up to reality and compassion and all of that. You can also get enlightened in the bardo of becoming, this 49-day bardo. But, you know, if you don't, then at some point you will see, as though in a dream, your mother and father, if you're going to take birth as a human being. You don't have to. You can take birth as an animal or a hell being or a god. But if you're going to take birth as a human being, which is what you want, because only human beings can tread the path to enlightenment, and we can go over why that's the case at some point. All other realms, beings of other realms, do not have the equipment to tread the path to enlightenment. So if you are born as a human being, at some point, if you're going to be born, you see your mother and father about to have intercourse, sexual relations. And when they do, if you're going to be reborn as a male, you are attracted to the woman. And if you are going to be reborn as a female, you are attracted to the man. And either way, you enter the woman's womb and become an embryo, and then proceed through the period of months to birth. However, you can also be reborn as a hell being, a hungry ghost, an animal, and in which case I suppose that you probably see something similar with the male and female animals mating. And you can be reborn as a jealous god or a god, which are purely mental rebirths. They are not physical, mostly. All of this is described and more in the Bardo Tydal, the path of awakening in the Bardo. That's the book. It's called, usually translated as the Tibetan Book of the Dead for reasons I've given you. It's a bad title. Throughout her essay, Francesca uses the translation of the Tibetan. Bardo Tydal translates as liberation through hearing in the Bardo. Tydal is liberation through hearing, and Bardo means Bardo. So that's the real title of this book, and that's what she uses a lot. She calls it liberation through hearing. Hearing what? Hearing these teachings, the teachings of the Bardo, the teachings that are contained in this book. So, she says in the beginning, we're assured that liberation from samsara can be accomplished through hearing these teachings during the Bardo, the death Bardos. How is it possible to be liberated just by hearing a text? And how can a dead person hear it being read? If they're dead, what are they hearing? Buddhism teaches that the consciousness, called variously in the Nyingma tradition, it's called Rikpa in Tibetan, Vidya in Sanskrit. In the Kagyu tradition, it's called Tamalgi-shepa, which means ordinary knowing. I don't know what the Sanskrit would be for that. In any event, what this refers to is the fact that as sentient beings, we are continuously and unstoppably conscious. Right now, you're conscious of hearing these words, of seeing the pictures on your screen. This is what it means to be alive and a human being. And so, yes, we can hear these teachings as we're alive and even as we're dead, even when we're dead, because the consciousness continues. The Tibetan teachings tell us that when a person dies, it varies from one person to the next, but typically the consciousness, the Rigpa, the Tamagishepa, the ordinary mind, which we all have, we're having it right now, unstoppably. It's what allows each of us to be aware of this screen and this voice. And this continues after death. And in fact, when a person dies, it varies from one person to the next, but typically, sort of classically, the consciousness stays around the body, even after the person is dead, for around 3 days, more or less. And so the instruction is to the survivors, to the living, not to destroy the body for at least that long. Not to, if it's going to be cremated, not to cremate it. If it's going to be buried, not to bury it, but to stay with it. And during this time, the dead person is still aware of their environment. So you don't want to act in an untoward way, in a way that would upset them. So there's no, you're enjoined not to do things like argue over their possessions. Who's going to inherit what? How much money or the jewelry or whatever like that. Don't do that. You know, you're also enjoined not to weep and wail, because this will upset the person. This sends a message to them saying that this is very wrong, their death. Instead, what you're enjoined to do, what you're told to do, is to be encouraging, full of love, friendship, and tell them you're dead, because sometimes people don't know they're dead. They might still think they're alive and be very puzzled. Why can't I communicate with my friends and relatives who are all around me? So you want to tell them you're dead and that it's okay, that you're about to go on a journey into a wonderful new life with full of opportunity and full of opportunity for creativity and all kinds of things like this, to encourage them to be cheerful, brave. You can do this with people who die around you. I've done it for both my parents. When they died, we kept the bodies for 3 to 4 days. With my father, we kept his body at home. And I swear, we all swear that after about 3 or 4 days, the room that he was in, which felt very warm and cheerful, was his bedroom. And he was in a coffin. And we packed the coffin with dry ice so the body wouldn't rot, during that time. And we all felt that after 3 or 4 days, the light went out. Suddenly the room felt cool, cold. With my mother, we had her in a coffin down at what is now the Shambhala Center here in town, Karmadzong, in the meditation room, in the main meditation room. And her coffin was right in front of the shrine for 3 days, 3.5 or 4 days. And again, I felt, it was my feeling that after the 4th day, her face, which had had warmth and life in it, even as a corpse, suddenly became like a cold piece of meat, as though her spirit had passed on. And this is what the teachings describe. So, we're reading Francesca on the Bardo Turtle, this chapter, Hearing the Power of Transmission. What happened was that she came from England as a close student of Trungpa Rinpoche, and she was a Sanskritist and a Tibetan scholar. And she and Trungpa Rinpoche translated the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I have the translation here. And I've got to talk to Michael, but we may do some readings from it. She translated this with him and wrote a preface and a forward commentary, which is quite good. And I think since we're talking so much about these teachings, we ought to take a look at something from the Book of the Dead, the Bardo Turdal, which she prefers to call liberation through hearing in the Bardo. So we are assured that liberation from samsara can be accomplished through hearing these teachings during the Bardo, the death Bardos. Again, there was those 3 death Bardos. The first one, the painful Bardo of dying. The second, the Bardo of Dharmata. And the third one, the Bardo of becoming, which is famous for lasting, they say, 49 days. But there are no real days. It's a dream state. I remember Songsar Khyentse Rinpoche talking about the Bardo of becoming. And he said, if you want to experience what it's like, it's this dream state. Well, you know what dreams are like, right? One moment you can be having a fight with your lover in Poughkeepsie, and the next moment you could be having a wonderful time with your mother in Oshkosh. It changes very fast. And Songsar Khyentse Rinpoche said, if you want to experience what the Bardo of becoming, the 49-day Bardo, the last of the death Bardos, is like, go and meditate in Times Square at noon. So a bunch of us actually did that. We took our zabutans and our gomdens, maybe about 10 of us, and we went, and there's a ticket booth where they sell last-minute tickets. Maybe some of you know Manhattan, know that ticket booth right in the middle of Times Square, and it's a zoo. I mean, billboards, huge billboards, flashing lights, cars, trucks, everything just roaring by, tons of people on their feet. We plunked our zabutans and gomdens down right in the middle of the sidewalk there and sat there for an hour with people streaming by, because that's what Songsar Khyentse said the Bardo of becoming is like. Excuse me. So the question is, how is it possible just to be liberated by hearing a text? And we've just been through this, that you are still conscious and can hear these teachings during the Bardo, in death. It says, Western science assumes that consciousness ends with death of the physical body, but Buddhism says this is not so. And the law of karma is extremely important in understanding what happens to you when you die. It has nothing to do with punishment, fate, higher power. It's strictly the law of karma, action and reaction. The Buddha said that if we want to understand our past lives, we need only look at our present conditions, for they're the result of the past. Especially they're the result of your mental states in the past. Especially of those mental states, they're the result of your intentions. Your intentions color your mind, and they create they're the 2 terms are vasana, which you could translate as perfuming the mind. Vasana perfumes the mind. And bijas, seeds. So when the vasanas are perfuming the mind, seeds are planted. And those seeds will ripen into your experience in the present moment. These bijas, vasanas and bijas. If we want to know what our future life will look like, we should examine our present actions, for they are the cause of the future. Not completely, because other factors come into play, the world around us, external events, people, but significantly, they color our future. But there are still too many variables to make accurate predictions, she says in this. But our reactions to the circumstances of our minds and what we make of them are entirely our own responsibility. It is the inner world of our thoughts, emotions, habits, and reactions that we can easily observe in this, the mechanism of cause and effect. So if you are living an angry life, it will play out in your karma. And if you do good deeds, these will come back to influence the quality of your life well. And I'm just picking out gross examples, but it gets very, very subtle. So it says, karma works from moment to moment as well as over long stretches of time. Any thought or emotion that arises in the mind creates an effect and leaves its trace there. This is vasanas. Leaving its trace is the bijas. And that trace can reproduce itself or as an echo or just another event. This is how our characters are shaped. The changing repetition of mind and behavior. And the force of karma is as strong in positive directions as it is in negative, creating conditions for goodness as well as for neurosis and suffering to develop. It is the very ordinary, familiar, and almost unnoticed current of thoughts, which we have all the time, that is continually determining the pattern of our destiny, the daydreaming and subconscious gossip that goes on all the time in our minds. The habitual thoughts and worries that go through our minds all the time are continually creating karma, perpetuating the sense of self. And it's a unique self, it's myself, with its unique karma and unique habitual patterns. But it's possible to stop the karmic chain reaction and break the pattern. We may still have to endure the results of past actions, but we do not have to perpetuate them. And the way you stop it is by coming completely present. Luminously, empty presence, shunyata, here and now, awake, completely awake, stepping out of these dreams. It says, whatever may have happened in the past, the doctrine of karma gives us the certainty that right now, at this very moment, we can begin to change the future course of our existence. How? By coming completely present and stepping out of dreams. This is our path. And this is why this book is so important, the Pravrittidal. Karma and the self go together. When you believe in an I, you're constantly dreaming about cause and effect for that I. It says, until a sentient being attains enlightenment, the sense of self is still there in the mind stream. So karma is produced. The chain of cause and effect creates the link between past, present, and future, between the past life, this life, and the next life. We're doing it all the time, in our thoughts, in our dreams. Every time we wake up, come completely present, we cut that chain. So even if you only do it once a day, it's a good thing. Even after separating from the physical body, the attachment to self continues. The dead person is still believing in themselves. So during the period after death, the departed consciousness still feels itself to be that same I as before. The sense of I continues even in death and beyond as it evolves and moves into the next life. He says the important point to understand is that I is always imaginary, always imaginary. Whether we're thinking of a past life, yesterday, now, tomorrow, the Bardo state, a future life, I is an imaginary creation. There is no individual entity, no I, that continues from one life to another, but only a continuous flow of change. The I that we imagine ourselves to be in this life is not the same as the I of the previous life or the I who will be born in the next life. In fact, from instant to instant, moment to moment, this I that we think of, that we think is unchanging and constant, is constantly changing and adapting to the conditions of the present moment. Yet these past, present, and future I's are linked together by the illusion of self and the karmic imprints that sustain it from life to life, all in the passing down of these thoughts. As long as we continue to believe in the self, karma and rebirth are real for us. So as long as we think about me, we're going to be bound by karma and be reborn. The moment the self is seen not to exist, the chain is broken, then and there. So the real purpose of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Tudo, is to escape from the whole cycle of birth and death. It's not to reassure us that we will continue to have chances to attain liberation in the future. It's to help us get out now. Just wondering, even this chapter is long. 6, 7, okay. So the important point to understand is that I, although it seems to be continuous, constant, is imaginary, constantly changing. The text says there is no individual entity that continues from one life to another, but only a continuous flow of change. The I that we imagine ourselves to be in this life is not the same as the I of the previous life or the I who will be born in the next life. Yet these past, present, and future I's are linked together by the illusion of self, an illusion. As long as we continue to believe in the self, karma and rebirth are real for us. We create actions that pattern our minds and make us behave in certain ways and experience certain things. The moment the self is seen not to exist, the chain is broken then and there. And so the real purpose of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is to escape from the whole cycle of birth and death. It's not to reassure us that we'll continue to have chances to achieve liberation in the future. It's to get out now, to awaken. So in the Bardo state, the sense of self arises linked by the chain of cause and effect, and it arises in connection to the previous life. Subtle imprints or traces of the mind create the feeling of having a body like the old one, and yet it's new every instant. It has all its senses intact, very similar to the sensation of a body we have when we are dreaming. So when you're dreaming, you have this sensation of having a body. In dreams, we're not using our physical senses to see and hear, but we still seem to have the experience of seeing and hearing. The same kind of process takes place for beings in the Bardo, just like in a dream. So we've been through this about how the consciousness of the recently deceased person remains in the vicinity for some time, and you express your love, your affection, your your enthusiasm for them. Because they're going to be strongly affected by the people around them. So it's very important for the family members and friends to remain calm, affectionate, cheerful. It says if they're frightened and overwhelmed by grief, the survivors, quarreling among themselves over their share of the inheritance, that happens. or if they perform the death rituals carelessly or hypocritically, all these negative emotions will be magnified in the perception of the dead person and will cause fear, anger, and confusion. These are instructions for us in how to handle the people who are going to be dying around us, if they haven't already. Trungpa Rinpoche emphasized that the best gift we can give the dead is to produce an environment of calm and warmth and confidence and cheerfulness. And then he puts, this text says, reading Liberation Through Hearing, the Book of the Dead, and especially reciting the verses connected with it, which contain its essence, and we're going to go through this perhaps in maybe the next class or the one after, can reassure and inspire the minds of the living at such an emotional time. This in itself will benefit the dead. That you are reassured and cheerful. Your fears are calmed. So it says, if the right circumstances come together, if the mind of the person reading the Book of the Dead to the dead person is stable enough, and the mind of the dead person responsive enough, which it will be during that 3+ day period right after death, then the inherent power of the teaching itself may bring about liberation. And I encourage you, the next time someone close to you dies, arrange, if you can, to be with the corpse, so-called, for 3+ days, communicating with it cheerfully. I remember when my father died, my brother and I were there, and who was it who said that? It was Trungpa Rinpoche. My brother came out of the room, and having been with my father, and oh no, it was my mother. She came out of the room, having been with my father, and said, well, I've been talking with your father, who's dead, of course. And my brother said, as long as he's not talking back. Which he wasn't, of course. So it's said that the consciousness of the dead person becomes immeasurably clearer when it is no longer confined by the coarse material body. So it will easily understand and remember the essential points of the instructions that are contained in the readings from the Book of the Dead. In several places, Liberation Through Hearing states that it is a reminder of what we have already been shown by our teachers and experienced in meditation. It emphasizes very strongly the importance of practice during life and recommends reading and memorizing the text so that we become completely familiar with its contents. We should make it so thoroughly a part of ourselves that we would never forget it, even if we were being chased by 7 dogs or 100 murderers, it says. This is Francesca. So throughout the instruction is to realize that one is dead, to recognize the dead state as it has been described to us without fear, knowing that we are about to transfer into a new life. And if you've been doing deity practice, I don't think, and maybe one or a few people here have, where you are meditating on Vajrayogini, for instance, you're reminded to look upon whatever you see as the manifestation of that deity, which is in reality your own awakened state. And you're encouraged as well, especially if you haven't been working with deity practice, so-called deity, it's yidam practice. Yidams are like Vajrayogini, Chakrasamvara, and many more. But those who haven't received empowerment in yidam practice are urged to have faith in Avalokiteshvara, the living presence of compassion. And we could study that. Again and again, the basic teachings of emptiness and compassion are found. Whatever appears, it has no real substance. So don't be either attracted by visions or afraid of them. They're just that, visions. You're the natural form of emptiness. You are, right now, much less in death. So nothing can hurt you, especially in death. Emptiness cannot harm emptiness. The recommendation is dedicate all your thoughts and all your actions to the good of others, and resolve to become enlightened for the sake of all beings. And if you have that kind of intention in mind, death will be much, much better. Trungpa Rinpoche said, whoever comes into contact with this teaching, even in the form of doubt or with an open mind, receives a sudden glimpse of enlightenment through the power of the transmission contained in these treasures. So I encourage you, get the Book of the Dead. Read it. We're going to be reading it in parts. This is a reference to what's called adhisthana. That's a very important word in Buddhism. It means blessing. It's the cornerstone of Vajrayana practice. Trungpa Rinpoche described it as creating an atmosphere that influences the environment, an intense experience of presence that overpowers and possesses us. He also uses the term transmission to translate the Sanskrit abhisheka, which is very related to adhisthana. This is the consecration or empowerment to do tantric practice. So abhisheka is a specific formal kind of adhisthana, of blessing. The two are very close and sometimes used synonymously in the tantras. So we will receive adhishtanas, and often abhishekas. Definitely, if we proceed on the Vajrayana path, you're going to be taking abhishekas. These are initiations into practices. It says every relationship between two people or more contains an element of adhisthana in some sense, whether it is positive or negative. But the adhisthana that is meant here is the transmission of the presence of the tantric guru. And that is the presence of pure, awakened mind, emptiness lit by luminosity. It's not about control on one side, nor is it about submission on the other. It's called forth by devotion and longing and received with faith in an open heart. It's the real business of the guru. It takes place in communication. That's where adhisthana takes place, and it communicates the essence of the teachings. It's the blessing that comes through when the teachings are communicated, really. He says the text, although enlightenment truly does dwell within us, it has to appear to come to us from outside because of our attachment to self. Ego cannot penetrate its own illusion and dissolve itself. So what comes from outside helps us dissolve ego. It's not that we're forbidden to do anything, but that psychologically in our own minds we need to know that we have received authentic permission and correct instruction from a qualified person for the practice to be effective. There is genuine transmission that takes place, and for that to happen, a relationship of trust must be created and exist between teacher and students. That trust, that communication, is the adhisthana, given by the guru, the teacher principle. The greater the trust we have in the guru, the more our confidence will increase. It is really a continuous process of opening up more and more to our innate Buddha nature. Self-doubt is the enemy of all this. So he says, at the very moment of transmission between teacher and student, the mind of the guru and the mind of the student meet and become one. There's no longer any separation between guru and disciple. So it is said that the guru gives us back what has always been our own. And the power of adhisthana, blessing, this communication, is inherent in the Bardo Tudal, the Book of the Dead, liberation through hearing, because it is a terma. The Book of the Dead, so-called, the Book of the Bardo Tudal, is a terma. Excuse me. It was revealed by Padmasambhava in the 8th century, hidden and rediscovered by Karmalingpa in the 14th century. Karmalingpa was supposed to be a reincarnation of one of Padmasambhava's close disciples, Chukyi Lodro Gyaltsen. He was a close disciple of Padmasambhava and a translator. And he reincarnated as Karmalingpa, who discovered this text in the 1300s. So it's a terma from Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, Padmakara. So for some reason, Trungpa Rinpoche preferred to call him Padmakara. It's another one of his names. It basically means the same thing as Padmasambhava, born from a lotus. And it's imbued, this text, with wisdom, compassion, and the power of Padmasambhava's presence, the power to liberate sentient beings. I'm quoting the text, it is as though he himself is present whenever the text is read. So as you read this text, the Book of the Dead, you can think of it coming right out of his mouth, Padmasambhava. And then it says the authority of a newly discovered terma, discovered in the 14th century, is just as great as one discovered centuries ago. We're getting close. Liberation through hearing says of itself, to meet with this is great good fortune. It is hard to meet, except for those who have purified the obscuring veils and developed goodness. This means that not just anyone can come across it. To hear it or read it at all implies that either in this life or in past lives, we have made a connection with it. We have accrued the karma, the good fortune, that allows us to be here today. The text says, even if we just happen to pick it up on a bookshop, this is not entirely by chance. The connections we have made during the whole measureless course of our existence are extremely significant. Through their power, seeds are sown, and again Through their power, those seeds may ripen at any time. That's why Trungpa Rinpoche said that any form of contact with this teaching will confer a sudden glimpse of enlightenment. So I'm encouraging you all to look at it. We need not believe in it, but something will definitely have entered our minds as a result. It does not mean that we become fully enlightened at that moment. Our confusion will probably prevent us from recognizing that sudden glimpse, but it will be reawakened at some time in the future. There is no doubt, as the Tantras say. Liberation through hearing is only one of the 6 ways of liberation taught in the Nyingma tradition. The other 5 are liberation through sight. So liberation through hearing is what we practice when we read the Bardo Tudo, the Book of the Dead. But there's liberation through sight, through touch, through taste, through remembrance, and through wearing. Liberation through sight is brought about by seeing terma objects, images, paintings, symbolic diagrams, or texts. This can wake us up. Through touch refers to, particularly to yabyum, having a tantric partner, performing enlightened sex. It's when your partner, if you're a male, your partner is dakini. If you're female, your partner is daka. Sometimes, and if you're gay, it can be the same. Padmakara, Padmasambhava, is described as always surrounded by dakinis. Liberation through touch. He and they are one. For although they appear in different forms, they are both manifestations of the one awakened state. So the relationship with the consort creates a direct connection with Guru Rinpoche himself. Liberation through taste is attained by eating special substances known as amrita, often translated as elixir, ambrosia, the nectar of immortality. These are often prepared in the form of pills, and I've got a lot of pills in my drawer here that have been given to me over the years by teachers and other people. And they're given to disciples for use in serious illness or at the time of death. They're really tiny little pills. Liberation through remembrance refers to certain instructions that specifically relate to the time of death. They're intended to be learned during this life and practiced sufficiently so that you're confident in them for the purpose of calling them to mind at death. Among them is a practice that I can't teach you because I don't have it, is the transference of consciousness. You can transfer your consciousness into a heaven, into an enlightened being at the time of death. And this practice will be discussed further in the book. Finally, liberation through wearing indicates the wearing of yantras. Yantras are diagrams, pictures, and written mantras that are generally kept in a pouch or amulet and more next to the skin. As well as being worn during life, they're often attached to the corpse. Texts containing these mantras are included in Karma Lingpa's Terma collection. Karma Lingpa, remember the fellow who discovered the Book of the Dead, received it as a Terma. It's recommended that they be read aloud with liberation through hearing, for the two combined are like a golden mandala inlaid with turquoise. And that's the end of that chapter. We could have a discussion for a little while. It's pretty dense material. And I'm going to talk with Michael about assigning parts of the Book of the Dead, especially the introductory parts that are quite good. But definitely you should read this. This is a Terma, one of the most famous. Just remember that the title, The Book of the Dead, is probably, I mean, it's okay. It's really liberation through hearing in the bardo, the space between death and rebirth in the case of this particular bardo. Any comments, questions, complaints? Shini.
Hi. I really like this chapter, especially the description around Adhisthana. I can't pronounce that.
Yes,
Blessing
Adhisthani. Yeah.
really struck me because I really feel the theme comes through that blessing is not really about something external, or it's not about something that somebody give it to you, but it's more, I feel like blessing doesn't really convey the true meaning. More and more, I feel it's more like a virus. Like you touch something and it kind of possesses you in a good sense. So that really comes through to me, which I appreciate. And I just want to also share that in this book, in this chapter, we talk about bardo instructions. A really good source, a practical source for bardo instruction, if you have somebody that who recently died that you want to read them to. It's in Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche's book, Living is Dying. So he actually has kind of a more than truncated version of what to say to the dead person. And I know that there's groups, at least a group that I'm a part of, where people actually use that instruction in his book to read to people who died in 49 days. So I just want to make that recommendation. I can try to put the link in the chat.
What's the title and the author again?
So it's a book by Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche. It's free for download on a website called Living is Dying. It goes through basic teachings on the bardo as well as beyond. And it has some very practical suggestions for what to do to people who are dying, and for yourself if you're kind of facing a situation where you expect to be dying soon. And that book, I think, in the appendix also have a yantra or like liberation through wearing that you can print, and it has instructions of how you prepare it. So anyways, I'll just stop talking. I'll just provide the link. Okay.
Thank you. That's really wonderful. It's by Dzongsa Khyentse. Okay. Nikki, you have your hand up.
Yes. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. I had a couple questions. One is the business of being able to calmly and cheerfully speak with a person who has died, being in proximity. It seems like these days, at least with many people, it's not going to be possible to be in proximity to the corpse. I mean, usually arrangements have been made and it's gone. Is it possible to do this, particularly, I guess, if there's more than one of you in community, to speak to them and to reassure them and that sort of thing from a distance? I mean, when you say their name and you speak and think about the person in together with people who know them, can they hear it? Can they receive it as they're dying or even after they're dead? Because it's very, very unlikely, at least in my life, there's going to be any proximity to, of course, when I'm gone. No one's going to have proximity to me. So
yes, definitely. It's absolutely possible. And in fact, we are enjoined to do that kind of thing, to meditate, to communicate with the person wherever they may be in the world for the 49 days.
Right.
You send them messages, they will receive them. In the bardo, there is no time and space. It's purely mental. So yes.
That's reassuring to hear. And I assume too for our animals too, as they pass, we can do that as well.
Definitely.
Because usually they're carried off. They're going to be somewhere cold in a freezer, or your friend's going to be in a morgue, and it would just be great to be able to communicate. That's good to know. My other question is, once we have, I know there's the way death is perceived here is just when the brain and the heart stop. That's not the case with what we're learning here. Do we know when that's happening that we are dead?
That we are
As
what?
opposed to that we are dead. I mean, are we aware when this is going on, or are we in a dream and we're just confused? Do we know that we have died? Do we know that?
It varies. So this is why you are instructed to be with the corpse and to tell the person you are dead. Don't be frightened. It's okay. You're going to be going on a new adventure, a new journey into a new life. And it's a new opportunity. So you want to encourage them with love, with good cheer, and with courage. This is what we're instructed to do as the survivors. Definitely. And it's what I've done when people close to me have died.
What if you know in this life that, as I doubt maybe this is a self-doubt thing. I doubt I am far enough along that I can get enlightenment. I guess I'm just still insecure about that. I do not want to come back. I have been in pain for 30 years. Perhaps this lifetime has been, to kind of wake me up with that, to not think, oh, it'd be fun to, come back. And I have no desire to come back. I don't know many people who feel that way. So when you're comforting the dead person, again, you're not near the corpse. You can do this remotely, and saying you're going on a great adventure. What if you don't want to? you want to basically do what the reason for the Book of the Dead is about, which is how to wake up and stop this whole cycle from happening endlessly.
You can encourage them to do that too. Basically,
okay. Tell them, go ahead, wake up.
Yeah, and you're a close friend. Now, to the extent that you yourself have realized the teachings deeply, you can help the dying person or the dead person more. And if you're just an ordinary person, like most of us are, then what you can give them is love and support and encouragement. But if you're a real teacher, you can communicate emptiness to that person and help them achieve enlightenment in the bardo. It depends on your degree of your realization.
Thank you.
Yeah. Lauren, this is interesting.
Hello. Two things I was thinking about. One was the how relevant it is hearing this stuff. Even though I'm not dead or dying, that I know of, the hearing stuff like giving encouragement, love, and cheerfulness. I feel like that's such an important thing when interacting with people, right? In real time. And so hearing these discussions and lectures helps me kind of wake up now. And so I appreciate that, if that makes any sense. But also, I was wondering about, I started thinking about embalming and organ donation, does that stuff have any effect on, I don't know if they were thinking about that stuff back when they're writing these books, but, the brain is intact, the body's intact, but let's say it's missing organs. Does that matter?
Yes, organ donation is fine. It's an act of generosity. Embalming It's just once the 3-day period is over, 3 to 4 days, the spirit has moved on and the body can be disposed of in whatever way. But we are enjoined, we're asked to keep the body around for those 3 or 4 days and to communicate with it, to give it encouragement, cheer, love. I haven't had that many people die, but definitely did that with both my parents. I know other people have too, with people close to them. It's wonderful to do. It really is. It's good for the survivors as well as for the dead person. No weeping and wailing. It's out. Especially no arguing over the inheritance. Ugh. Okay. Steve.
I was wondering I assume the recommended translation would be Francesca's or,
Yeah,
yeah?
I'd recommend. What do you think, Michael? Francesca's? There are others.
Oh, there's lots of them, but
Yeah,
I was
that's
just
the one
curious
I
what the
would read.
recommended one is.
That's the one I would read.
Yeah, me too.
I think it's well done, and the introduction by Trungpa Rinpoche is really good.
It is really good.
What I've always heard in regard to organ donation is, yes, it's a good thing to do, but to be very clear about your intention, and so that, as with being able to accept the inevitability of death at some point as the end point of our lives, that the more we're prepared in our minds, then the easier all of this is. And the opposite is also true. The more we cling and we deny, the worse, the more difficult it's going to be. So that's why practice and some preparation in the sense of, and not just in terms of worldly things, which obviously makes it easier for people that, you know, leave behind, but preparation in terms of our own minds and some acceptance of the inevitability as opposed to denial.
These are really beautiful teachings. So yes, we want to read parts of the Bardo Tudor because they have very much to do with our own waking up now, as well as how we die, to die well. Each one of us. Very important. Lodra.
For the transfer of consciousness practice, is it possible for us to request specifics out of the instructor next to our deathbed?
Next to what?
Next to our deathbed?
No, we should learn it ahead of time. Oh, you mean that if you have someone in your orbit who is capable of doing it, you can ask
Right.
them on your deathbed, sure.
Is it possible to ask something like if they could send us to one of the lower realms, but with the understanding of the Dharma in our hearts, so that we can maintain our bodhisattva vows in there?
I've never heard that one, but you can definitely ask to be reborn as a bodhisattva. Definitely.
Thank you.
And the whole thrust of being a bodhisattva is to be a benefit to others. And as much as you can. That's what a bodhisattva does. That's wonderful. Karen Sue.
Can the reading be done by anyone? In other words, can I make, in other words, when I die, I don't know if I will be surrounded by anyone who knows about this, but can they read from the Tibetan Book of the Dead for me as I'm dying?
Yes, definitely. Michael, you agree?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah, definitely.
And if there are certain parts you'd read at certain times, somewhere I have some guidelines on that. I'll see if I can find it.
Great. Thank you. Oh, that 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 is so comforting to me.
Yeah,
Really, really comforting. Thank you.
we're so fortunate. These
Really.
words from Padmasambhava all the way to us on our deathbed. Wow. Like he's speaking to us across the centuries. Anybody else? I mean, we could end early. It was a little shorter this evening because just moi. Michael's going to have a longer journey next week.
I will, but I have a shorter reading we could read right now that's kind of apropos of all of the things that we're asked to consider that kind of go beyond our ordinary conception of how things are. So this is a little piece from Dunlop Rinpoche, where he's talking about Padmasambhava altogether, actually. He says, it's important for us to reflect on Padmasambhava's life and his retinue of Dakinis, and see whether we are open-minded enough to give inconceivable reality a chance. It is up to us. Chandrakirti said, when we shoot an arrow into space, no matter how strong we are, the arrow will eventually fall back onto the ground. However, the arrow falls not because it reaches the end of space, but because we reach the end of our strength. In a similar way, when we look at the events in Padmasambhava's life and try to understand the approach of the Vajrayana, we must acknowledge that our conceptual and labeling thoughts have limited power. They cannot go beyond a certain point and will always fall back onto the ground of duality eventually. But that does not mean that this is the end of reality. Just because we can't see Padmasambhava or Dakinis with our eyes, and just because we cannot physically fly to Uddiyana, does not mean that such realities do not exist. It just means that the power of our ordinary perceptions and conceptions has come to its limit. But that limit is not ultimate reality. Therefore, it is important for us to acknowledge that and develop a sense of openness to inconceivable reality.
Yeah, what a miraculous event it's going to be for each one of us. Death. Wow. And it's so important to realize that consciousness does not stop with death. And so we train insanity so that we can remain sane as we go through the death process. Awake. Mark Eskenazi.
Hi, this is great. Yeah, I was just I made some notes yesterday, and it, to be enlightened, to break the chain, we have to essentially discover that there is no I. And we are more likely in the bardos to experience that moment of no I. And I was just, that's my understanding. And if people are repeating from the Book of the Dead, and we're discovering, because we can hear them, that we are dead, Do we, it said we still have a sense of our body like a dream. So, but I also thought I read something where it said that we're, no, I'm not sure. Maybe I'm just being wishfully thinking that if we realize that we have no body, we're no longer connected to the body, that this could be really helpful for enlightenment. And if we are enlightened, do we just disappear? We've gotten off the track, or do we I don't, I'm going on here. Never mind. If you if you could pull something out of that, I don't know. Seems very confusing to me. Anyway. Never mind.
Anything, Michael?
Look right into confusion itself.
But
These teachings are so profound because they're dealing with perhaps the most profound, or one of the most profound experiences of our lifetimes and our death times. They're saying that we will be aware, conscious, as we go through the death process, and then telling us how to do it. I mean, if you're not aware, well, nothing wasted, nothing lost. But if we are, holy mackerel. These teachings are such a gift.
I know Vicky was talking about pain, and I was thinking that if we're reborn, then your pain is gone. So can't that be kind of okay?
If you're reborn, you're what?
Vicky was talking about the pain she experiences in her life, but if she's reborn in a human birth, she's reborn as a different person without that pain. So can't that be okay?
Sure, but there's no telling how you'll be reborn, I mean, it depends on your karma.
Right.
No, I wasn't in pain when I was younger. It's just been the last 30, 40 years. So no, that's no guarantee that I'm not gonna have a whole crap load of pain in another life. It's just basically hit me upside. I was like, I have no wish to go through this again. It's just
Right.
I've often wished I were already gone, and it's like maybe this is kind of what I'm supposed to be processing in this life. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Anybody else? We're very close to finishing. And if not, we could just do the closing chants a little bit early. What do you think, Michael?
Okay by me, if it's okay by everyone else. Going once and twice. All right.
So next week, we're going to do the second chapter that was assigned for this week. This week we did Hearing the Power of Transmission. Next week we're doing Bardo, Nowness. It's called Bardo, the Experience of Nowness. The next chapter. It's considerably longer.
Okay.
Good.
So I will put up the dedication of merit so that we can dedicate the merit generated by our study and practice for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Okay. Hi, Jenny.
By this merit may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Good night, everyone.
Thank you,
Hi,
John.
everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, John.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
John.
you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Good night. Where is it? Leave. Leave.